This is 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy transition in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. The microgrid market has started to really take off during the last few years. Led by big energy consumers that are looking for more resilient, more secure power, the microgrid market has grown at about a 20% growth rate since 2020. In today's episode, we're going to unpack how microgrids work, what makes them different than a backup generator, and where the market may be headed given some recent federal rules making, and of course, the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about 8 minutes more than Will Smith spent tuning into the Oscars this year. Let's get it on. The U.S. power grid is often referred to as the largest machine ever created by humankind. It's big. It's complex. Every second of every day, it has to balance instantaneous demand for power with the generation of electricity, all without, for the most part, the ability to store those electrons for periods of high demand. And for the most part, our grid operators do a phenomenal job in ensuring that when we flip that light switch on, the lights go on. Even at times when a weather event or some other instance takes down a part of the power grid, the effects are usually pretty well contained and don't cascade throughout the rest of the country. But outages do happen, and ensuring reliable electricity at all times is one of the big reasons why microgrids have become increasingly popular. According to Wood Mackenzie, the microgrid market reached 10 gigawatts in the third quarter of 2022, 7 gigawatts of which were in operation, and that was a 20% growth over 2021. So what is a microgrid? For the most part, think of them as just a scaled-down version of our national power grid, but serving only a few facilities. Microgrids have the ability to generate their own power, potentially even store it, and then ensure distribution off to various connected facilities on its network. There are three main types of setups for microgrids. The first is what is called off-grid or islanded microgrids, where the network exists completely disconnected from any other power source. These are naturally very valuable in remote locations where interconnection to a power grid isn't even possible. But it also has use cases whenever a facility, lab, residence wants to disconnect themselves from the broader power grid. But microgrids can also be connected to the broader distribution network as well, something called grid-connected microgrids. In these cases, the microgrid usually exists behind one meter that's connected to the broader network. But behind that meter could be a whole array of facilities, solar panels, batteries. These grid-connected microgrids are able to consume power off the main grid, but in instances when the broader grid goes down, the microgrid provides a reliable failsafe to ensure continuing operation. But these grid-connected systems are more than just an expensive backup supply. For one thing, a microgrid consisting of multiple solar arrays and maybe a few batteries is far easier to deploy as one system with one interconnection than as a series of individual projects. And the microgrid operator has a lot more flexibility in what can be done behind the meter with regard to, say, big energy spikes on demand or large amounts of energy generation that don't need to be managed at the bigger power grid level. Take, for instance, a facility that's looking to electrify their vehicle fleet. That could create a huge demand for electricity that, frankly, the local power grid may not be able to handle. But a microgrid could handle that demand easier, be sized appropriately to support the vehicle electrification efforts, and in turn, moderate what would be required from the utility. And then the last type of microgrid is what we call nested, where multiple microgrids connect to each other, network together in order to share power across entities. These systems may still be grid connected, but they have their own supervisory control system that optimizes the energy use just over the network of smaller grids. Think of it as a much smaller version of our national grid scaled down in order to optimize just for the relevant participants. And these grids are super flexible in allowing different entities to share, sell, consume power in ways that aren't necessarily tied to how their utility would want them to purchase power. Okay, those are the three types of microgrids: off-grid, grid-connected, and nested. But it's useful to think about what a microgrid is not as well. For one thing, it's not a backup diesel generator. Those backup systems are deployed only at times of emergency and aren't running 24/7 like a microgrid. And those solar panels on your house, those don't really count as a microgrid either. Yeah, distributed resources such as solar panels generate power behind the electric meter, but they lack the sophistication of a microgrid that's meant to be a full power source for your facility. Solar panels don't provide the 24/7 assurance of power that a microgrid does, nor really would they even keep your lights on during an outage. Facilities with solar still require the grid, whereas a microgrid only uses the bigger grid for its backup support. Solar does, however, play an increasingly important role within microgrids. Given that this is an energy transition podcast, it's probably not surprising to learn that many of today's microgrids are being developed with solar and storage resources as the main types of power generators. But microgrids don't have to be solar either. Natural gas is actually a far more popular fuel source today than anything else, as it provides a stable, secure fuel source that a campus or facility can count on at any time of the day. Solar projects, though, are growing quickly. These projects are coupled with battery storage and provide a self-contained clean energy system that companies can rely upon. And the recently passed IRA is likely to only make these options more popular, as the tax credits for both solar and storage will drive down the costs for these systems. And the other federal policy that is going to really influence microgrid development is FERC Order 2222, which allows distributed resources to participate in the wholesale markets. In layman's terms, that means that a microgrid composed of solar and battery storage can negotiate contracts to sell excess power to other customers outside of their network. And that opens up a lot of business models that can further help move these solar plus microgrids forward. Microgrids will play an important role in the energy transition. Holding to our theme from earlier episodes about how the energy transition is as much about giving the customer more power and control over their energy, microgrids are an enabling technology for that. They allow large military bases, college campuses, or an industrial complex to disconnect from the bigger grid and ensure a reliable supply of power. And microgrids are unlocking new business models, such as peer-to-peer sharing of power that enables entire communities to buy and sell power separate from the local utility. And these microgrids enable change to happen faster. Utilities are doing as much as they can to upgrade their infrastructure to handle the huge demands of EV electrification and solar or wind intermittency. But microgrids can speed along that transition because they isolate those big changes from the broader power network, making it easier to get new EV fleets or big solar generators online. I'm Paul Schuster, and this has been your 8 Minutes.